Hi, everybody. I hope we have some people that are going to listen to this, whether you're going to see it now or see it later. Doesn't really matter. We're going to be telling stories from on this Milledgeville Public Library page, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at about 3 o'clock. Today, I'm telling a story from the library, as you can see from the fireplace behind me. I came in today to check the mail and do a few little things like that and found it's very, very happy to find that our stuffed animals, if they're having parties at night, they're cleaning up after themselves like good kids. There's no messes. The library still looks very clean, so that's a good thing. Today's story is the story of Yeh Shen, and this is a story that comes from China. It is a very, very old story. It's the story of Yeh Shen. Once, long ago in the dim and distant past, long before the Qin or the Han dynasties, there was a chieftain of one of the one of the cave tribes. And the cave tribes, these were people that all lived in caves. They did not live in houses. They lived in caves, all of them. And this cave chieftain's name was Wu. Now, in those days, it was customary, it was the thing that they did, that if there was a chieftain, he took 2 wives, not 1, 2. So Chief Wu took 2 wives. And in time, both of his wives each bore him a beautiful baby daughter. Well, unfortunately, one of the wives grew sick and she died. And then shortly after that, Chief Wu also grew sick and he died. And so their little daughter was left an orphan, and her name was Yeh Shen. Well, Yeh Shen was raised and grew up in her stepmother's house in the cave. And her stepmother did not like Yeh Shen because Yeh Shen was very beautiful. Her skin was as smooth as ivory and her eyes were like deep pools. But stepsister, the stepmother's daughter, was not very pretty when she grew up. So stepmother did not like Yeh Shen, and she gave Yeh Shen all of the hardest and most unpleasant chores to do. And Yeh Shen grew up like that, and she wore rags, and she did all of the hardest chores. But she had a friend, a secret friend. A secret friend. It was a fish. Yeh Shen had found the fish in the pond, and although stepmother did not give her much to eat, she always saved a little something for her friend the fish. And when the fish would see her coming, it would come and it would jump up on the shore of the pond, and she would feed the fish, and then it would slip back into the water. And she took great delight in going down and talking to her friend the fish, and she was very comforted by talking to him. Well, secrets have a tendency to get found out, especially secrets like that. And eventually, stepmother heard about the fish. So she went down to the pond and she looked and she looked and she looked, but she couldn't find the fish because the fish was very smart. And the fish knew that that was not his friend Yeh Shen and that the stepmother was not his friend, and he hid. Well, stepmother was rather clever too. So she went back to the house and she thought for a bit. And then she came up with a plan and she said, I know what to do. And she told Yeh Shen, we need more firewood. But wait! The neighbors might see you. Leave your raggedy old coat here. So Yeh Shen took off her coat and she went out to collect more firewood. And stepmother put on Yeh Shen's coat and she went down to the pond. And she came up to the edge of the pond, and the fish saw Yeh Shen's coat. And so the fish jumped out of the water onto the bank to be fed. And stepmother pulled out a knife and killed that fish and wrapped it up in the coat and took it home and cooked it for supper. Well, that night, when Yeh Shen went down to the edge of the pond to see her friend wasn't there. And she cried because she missed her friend so terribly much. And then suddenly an old man came up. And he had very long gray hair and very long gray clothes. And he said to her, "Yeh Shen, I need to tell you about your friend the fish." And she said, "Oh, my friend the fish, he's gone." And the old man said, "Yes, I know. And sadly, it is your stepmother who is to blame for your misfortune yet again. But I need to tell you, the fish still has something for you." What could he have for me now, good uncle? He's dead." "Well, yes, but if you go and collect the bones of your fish from the refuse heap, they are filled with a very good, powerful spirit. And if you keep them with you and you are in very great need, you only need to ask, and it will be given to you. But do not waste this great gift." And then the old man simply vanished up into heaven. Well, Yeh Shen was a little bit startled, but she went out to the refuse heap, to the trash heap, and she gathered up those bones of that fish, and she took them and she hid them in her room. And whenever she was feeling sad, she would go and she would talk to them. And when she was very, very hungry because stepmother did not feed her enough, she would go and she would kneel down in front of the bones and she would say, "I'm very hungry. Could I have a little bit of food?" And a little bowl of food would appear and she would eat the food. Well, this went on for a while. And then the winter passed and the spring came. Now, the spring was very important. Do you know, during the winter in those parts, they stayed in their caves all winter long, just like we're doing now, staying in our houses all the time and not really going outside. So, when the spring came, everybody got so excited because they could leave the cave and they could see other people, and they had a big, big festival, a big party. And all of the young women and all of the young men would get all dressed up in their best clothes, and they would go to the festival to try to find somebody to marry. Well, Yeh Shen, of course, as you can imagine, wanted to go to the festival. But stepmother wanted to find someone for stepsister to marry. So she didn't want Yeh Shen to go to the festival because stepsister wasn't very pretty. And if Yeh Shen went to the festival, all of the young men were going to want to marry the beautiful Yeh Shen. So stepmother told Yeh Shen she could not go to the festival. Well, when the time came for the festival, stepmother and stepsister got all dressed up in their best clothes, and they put all of their yummy food in their baskets to take with them to the festival and to have at the parties. And they left for the festival, and they left Yeh Shen at home. They said, "Yeh Shen, you must stay home and guard the fruit trees to make sure that no one steals our fruit." Well, Yeh Shen knew everybody was at the festival. They weren't going to be stealing the fruit, but she knew that stepmother didn't want her to go. Well, as soon as stepmother and stepsisters were well on their way, Yeh Shen went to the bones of her fish and she knelt down and she said, "I would very much like to go to the festival. Please, my friend, do you know somewhere where I could borrow a beautiful dress?" Well, as soon as she said that, suddenly Yeh Shen was wearing the most beautiful dress of azure blue. That's a blue kind of like this color a little bit. And she was wearing a cloak on her shoulders made of kingfisher feathers. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what kingfisher feathers looked like, so I found a book and I looked it up. The kingfisher is this bird right here. And if you can kind of see, his feathers kind of turn blue and green and black, depending on how you turn them. They're very pretty. So she was wearing a beautiful blue dress and a beautiful cloak on her shoulders made of all of these beautiful feathers. But the most beautiful part of the entire dress were the sandals she was wearing. They were entirely made of gold, and there was stitching on the shoes that made them look like little fish scales. And although they should have been very heavy because they were made of gold, there was magic in them, for they were light as a feather, and they didn't make a sound as Yeh Shen walked about in them. Well, she was delighting in the beautiful dress and the lovely shoes and the beautiful soft cloak, and she heard a voice from the bones say, "Take care not to lose your shoes." "Oh, I'll be very careful. I won't lose them. I promise." And Yeh Shen ran off to the festival. Well, when she arrived at the festival, of course, everyone wanted to know who the most beautiful girl was that they were seeing. And she was just walking about, looking at everything and enjoying the music and the singing and the dancing. And then she heard a voice. It was stepsister's voice, and she said, "Mother, does she not resemble our Yeh Shen?" Well, that frightened Yeh Shen quite a bit, for she knew she'd be in a lot of trouble if stepmother caught her. And so she hurried away from the festival, and she ran home. But as she ran down the road, she was in such a hurry she wasn't paying attention, and one of her sandals fell off. And as soon as that sandal fell off, suddenly she was clothed all in her rags again. Her beautiful dress and her cloak were gone. And when she got home, all she had left was one tiny little gold sandal. She had very small feet, very small shoe. She took it back to the fish, and she put it in front of the fish, and she said, "I'm so sorry. I dropped one of the shoes, but I promise I will find it." And there was no reply. And Yeh Shen knew that she had lost her friend because she hadn't been careful. She began to cry, and she ran out of the house. And she cried and cried, sitting under the fruit trees. She cried so much she fell asleep. Well, stepmother, as soon as stepsister had said, "Mother, I think that's Yeh Shen," she'd gotten a bit concerned. And so she made sure that stepsister was in a good place, and then she went home to check and make sure it was not Yeh Shen. Well, when she got home, she found Yeh Shen asleep, wrapped around the fruit tree. And so she went back to the festival. Well, Yeh Shen woke up, and she went and she hid that little tiny shoe in her bed straw so that it could not be found. And she went looking for that shoe, but she couldn't find it. Because, you see, one of the villagers had already come by, and he had found that little tiny shoe, and he knew that this little shoe, made entirely of gold, was very valuable, and it would be worth a lot of money. So he took it to one of the merchants, and he sold it to the merchant. Well, the merchant took that little shoe, and he said, "This is a very beautiful shoe. And I have been wanting to trade in the island kingdom of Tohan, but I had nothing good enough to give to the king so that he would let me. Now I do." And so he went to the island kingdom of Tohan, which was nearby. And he brought that shoe, and he presented that beautiful little golden shoe to the king. And the king was delighted. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The little stitching that looks like fish's scales. And it's a solid golden sole, but it's light as a feather. And it doesn't make any noise when you tap it on the table. So very strange. Well, the king looked at that shoe every day. Every day he looked at the shoe. And he admired the beauty of the shoe and how wonderful it looked. And eventually he decided he needed to meet the woman that this shoe belonged to, because it was so beautiful. It was just so beautiful. He needed to meet the woman who owned it. And so he sent out the word that he wanted to meet the woman who owned this shoe. And every woman from his island kingdom came and tried on the shoe, but it didn't fit any of them. So then the king thought, well, they told me that this shoe was found near where the cave people live. I will go there. And so he went near where the shoe had been found, and he set up a pavilion, a big tent. And he put the shoe in the tent on a little pillow. And he sent out a herald, and he said, "Herald, tell all of the people that I am going to return this shoe to its owner, and that they want to get it back. She will have to come and claim it." So the herald did, and the king and all of his soldiers hid nearby so that they could watch. And very soon that pavilion started to fill up, and all day long it was crowded with people. So many women coming in and trying on the shoe and trying to make it fit their foot. Stepmother and stepsister came too, but it didn't fit any of them. And as the day began to close and the dark began to fall, the women started to go home. Well, after a little while, the king's men said, "Your Majesty, it is dark and the women have left. Should we go home?" And the king said, "No, I think we will wait a little bit longer. We can sleep here. It is a nice night." All right, so they continued to watch and to wait. And in the darkest part of the night, when the moon slipped behind a cloud, suddenly here came a young lady dressed all in rags, tiptoeing into the pavilion. It was Yeh Shen. And she went up and she knelt near that shoe and she looked at it and she looked at it and she looked, and only when she was absolutely positive that that was her shoe did she pick it up. "Yes, it's mine." And so she took it out of the pavilion, and she was thinking, "If I can give this shoe back to the fish, perhaps I will get my friend back, and he will talk to me again." She was very excited. Well, at first the king thought, "That shoe cannot possibly belong to that raggedy dressed girl. I am going to have her arrested and thrown into prison." But just as she was stepping out of the pavilion, a beam of light came down from the moon, broke through the clouds, and lit up her face. And the king realized that she did not look like a servant, even though she might be dressed like one. She had a very sweet face and a very kind-looking face. And so he made a motion to his men to wait and to not move. And when Yeh Shen left and walked down the road, the king quietly stood up and his soldiers followed him, and they walked down the road and they followed her at a distance. Well, Yeh Shen went into the house, or the cave, and she went in and she closed the door and she went into her room and she brought out the other shoe, and she was just about to take those two shoes to the bones of the fish when suddenly there was a pounding on the door. Oh, goodness, it was the middle of the night. Who could possibly be at the door? She didn't have enough time to hide the shoes, so she ran to the door and she opened the door, and oh my goodness, there was a king standing on her doorstep. "Oh my, Your Majesty?" And he said, "Young lady, would you please put on those shoes that you're holding?" All right, so she put on the shoes. And when she stood up, suddenly she was dressed again in that azure gown and that beautiful cloak of kingfisher feathers and the golden shoes on her feet. And when she stood up, the king saw her face and how pretty she was, and she looked like an angel. And he said, "I know I have found my true love. Will you come back to my kingdom with me and marry me?" And she said, "Oh, yes." He was rather good looking, and she would not have to live with stepmother and stepsister anymore. And so she did. She went back to his kingdom with him. But because they had been cruel to his beloved Yeh Shen, the king would not allow her to bring stepmother and stepsister back with him. And so they were forced to live in their cave for the rest of their days. But Yeh Shen and the prince went to the island kingdom of Toan, and they were married, and they lived very, very happily. So that is the tale of Yeh Shen, a tale from China. And I hope you enjoyed it. And next week, on Monday, at about 3 o'clock, if you come back to the Milledgeville Public Library IL Facebook page, I will be telling another story, and this time I think we will tell this story. Let's tell a story about a boy. Let's tell the story of Hans and the Little Iron Man. This story comes from Germany. So come on back on Monday and hear the story of Hans and the Little Iron Man. See you later.